Hello everyone, this is Taliesin McKnight, and today's broadcast I'd like to talk a little bit about astrology and what it means in what astrology is really all about. Now, to the ancients, there were many sects within paganism that focused upon deeper knowledge, deeper wisdom. The pagans were not all ignorant. There were the philosophers, those that studied the heavens. They studied the stars and the planets. They looked into chemistry and how matter changes and transforms. They looked at medicines. These were people that were versed in nature's lore. Now, it's quite natural for a human being to look up at the stars and wonder. But to the ancient sages, each star had an energy. Each star had an attribute. And there came about the great, almost, if you think about it, almost impossible task of actually counting and naming the stars. Let's hold on for a minute. Can you imagine just the idea of counting and naming the stars? They look endless, like seas, like grains of sand. But they did name them. Each constellation had its own meaning, its own energy. Orion had a certain energy, which is explained in the myths. Jupiter had an energy. So did Mars. Now, the 7 planets, they move in a particular line. So you have these different constellations, groups of stars that each had an energy. Each constellation, every star had an energy, a divine power. And they also noticed 7 planets. The planets, the sun moves in a certain course. This is called the ecliptic. All the planets move in the same line. All the planets move in the same line. And this line lines up with 12 constellations, which are the signs of the zodiac. The word zodiac comes from the Greek word zodiakos, or animals. Thus, the exact band with which the planets go through, the exact bands through which the planets go through the ecliptic lines up with 12 zodiac signs. The energies of the planets, as it lines up with the constellation, is the force that's active in the world at the time. There was believed that there was the divine outpouring that came from the verbum fiat, the great word. Beyond all was the prima mobile, the one, the monad, that which precedes being. Within the monad was the realm of the deacons. Which exerted power over the zodiac, which exerted power over the planets, which exerted power over the earth. I'll talk more about the deacons and such later on when I get into the Egyptian elements that were added to this astrological system. Now, of course, astrology, as we know it, began in Babylon, in Chaldea. This is where we find the earliest remnants of archaeological artifacts that show that they did natal charts. The Greeks picked it up, and they had the myths explaining the powers of the stars, the planets. So you had Greek astrology, which is a lot of what we use today. And after the Alexandrian conquest, when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt from the Persians, and then in the Ptolemaic dynasty through his general, King Ptolemy Soter, through this Hellenization of Egypt, there was a blending of a little bit of Egyptian elements in this as well. Now, Hermeticism is said to be the dating of the Hermetic writings. Many people say that the Hermetic writings must go back to around 100, 200 AD. So a little bit around the rising of Christianity, around the second, 3rd century AD. Now, why do we say that we know that Hermeticism goes back to at least the 3rd century. How do we know that? We know that Hermeticism is older than that, goes back that far because the early church father Augustine, who lived in the 4th century, he talked about the Hermetic writings. And then the church father Lactantius also talked about the Hermetic writings in the 3rd century. So we know that Hermeticism goes back at least to the 1st, 2nd century. Now this Egyptian, Greco-Egyptian pagan magic, this pagan this blending of Greek and Egyptian astrology and magic and all of that in these traditions, in philosophy, which is primarily a Gnostic, Neoplatonic type Greek thought to its philosophy. This system is a survival of which we have records of pagan magic that predated Christianity. Well, Hermeticism goes around to around the 3rd century AD. But you know that these traditions, these writings, had to have come from somewhere. Nothing is in a vacuum. All things are influenced by the forces around them. This means that Hermeticism is derived from older magical practices of the Egyptians and the Greeks, blended together. They had to have derived their concepts from somewhere. This means that we have a pre-Christian pagan system of magic that was done by the hierophants, the holders of the keys, that survives to this day. Now the Hermeticism we have today is a little bit different because in the Renaissance, now the Hermetic writings survived through in the Middle East, through the Turks, through the Sabians of Haram, the Arabs. The Arabs did preserve some of the Hermetic documents. And in the Renaissance in Italy, it wasn't until then that European was completely Christianized. But in around the year 1460, Cosimo de' Medici, who was the ruler of Florence at the time, commissioned agents to go scour the monasteries, to look in ancient pagan temples for survivals of this ancient knowledge. Marsilio Ficino was to translate. They procured works by Plato, which include Plato's Republic and the Symposium, I believe, and also the Corpus Hermeticum and the Asclepius. Cosimo de' Medici, the ruler of Florence, was going to die the next year, so he wanted Cosimo de' Medici to translate this first. And so it was Christianized, it was blended with the Kabbalah. You had various alchemists running around in the 1700s, calling themselves Rosicrucians and blending it with the Gnostic type Christianity. And then at the end of the 19th century, you had the Golden Dawn. Oh, you also had John Dee back in the day, around the time of the rule of Queen Elizabeth I. You had John Dee and his Enochian magic. And then at the end of the 19th century, you had the Golden Dawn, the works of Aleister Crowley, Eastern teachings from the East, from the Hindus, from the Brahmins, were coming over from Madame Blavatsky, and we have sort of a westernized form which we call Theosophy, the Theosophical Society of Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. The Rosicrucian orders still keep the Rosicrucian doctrine, which is a survival of this ancient Hermetic tradition, kind of blended together with other things. So we have the survivals in Rosicrucian orders. Some are to argue that in Freemasonry, some of the symbolism was influenced by this Renaissance of the times. Now, another thing you need to understand is, what does the word Renaissance mean? The word Renaissance refers to a period in history to around the 1500s. It's after the Dark Ages. Renaissance is a French word, Renaissance, which means rebirth. It was a period in which we embraced the knowledge from the ancient past, the classical, the seven liberal arts of the Greeks. We embraced ancient knowledge, and that's when all this started coming up. And so today we have the Jesus grimoires, which are the grimoires that popped up, which Christianized the pagan magic, and today we have these survivals. So anyways, that is Hermeticism, and a lot of it is astrological. You see, they saw the cosmos as a reflection of the divine man. There's a divine outpouring. Each star had its own energy, every zodiac sign. This energy in the divine outpouring manifested in the vegetable kingdom, in the mineral kingdom, in metals, and in man. So in the different kingdoms of nature, mineral, vegetable, animal, human, these energies in the stars, the world without manifested in us, the energy manifested within physical things. So that certain plants, certain herbs correspond to this planet. This herb corresponds to that planet. Certain stones are ascribed to different stars. Different metals, gold is the metal of the sun. So that by realizing and knowing that this metal is of the sun, knowing the correspondences between metals, stones, and herbs, and the planets was a key to magic. Because there is the materia and then there is the spiritus. Now the materia could be seen as the receptacle, the material vessel, that is the material form, the material manifestation of whatever force. The spiritus is the essence that it receives from above. The spiritus is the power of the stars or whatever that receives the virtue. So if you can manipulate the spiritus, that is the sulfur, the planetary energy, you take certain herbs, certain stones. This is the stone of Venus. I'm going to take copper, inscribe symbols of Venus, and then I'm going to call forth from my psyche the Venetian thing. Now this is why the use of trance, the use of altered states, being able to meditate is important to the modern magus, is because according to these traditions, you see, these astral forces, the powers of the sun, moon, and stars also exist within man, in our psyche. We have an aspect to us that is lust and love. This is Venus. We have an aspect of us that's courageous and brave. We have aggressiveness. We have anger and wrath. This is Mars. We have these different parts to our psyche, so that is as within, so without. As above, so below. There is a universal pattern of manifestation that goes from each level of things. There's a universal pattern which Kabbalists have used the glyph of the Tree of Life for. You know, it's a glyph, 10 spheres. That's what they use to represent it. They're different glyphs. No one really knows the universal pattern. Do we? Do we know the universal pattern? Are we capable of that kind of knowledge? How enlightened must these individuals have been to have discovered the cosmic pattern, the blueprint? But however, they believed they could read it in the stars and within man. Now, you would get the stone of Jupiter, the herb of Jupiter. You would burn the incense of Jupiter on the day of Jupiter, when Jupiter is prominent in the heavens. That's the most important thing. That's what a lot of modern ceremonial magicians don't even take into account. They'll do it on Tuesday, the day of Mars. They'll have the incense of Mars and everything. And Mars isn't even in a positive sign. That doesn't make any damn sense. You need to know where Mars is. You need to know where the planets are aligned. How the hell are you going to practice magic if you don't even know where the stars and planets are? That doesn't make any sense. And so if you know that Mars is prominent, it's aligned with this, and this is Mars is aligned in this, and then you take the metal of Mars, iron, you take herbs of Mars, you burn the herbs, you put in the metal, you engrave symbols of Mars, which connects to its energy, and then you call from yourself, your psyche, your consciousness, the anger, the wrath within you, the Mars within you. You call this forth from your psyche so that you bring that forth too. So by bringing forth the force from the herbs, stones, metals, and within, you could call down and invoke the power of the star itself. And if you can do this in a clearly, in a moment of ecstasy, inflame thyself in praying, if you can do this in a moment of complete ecstasy, then supposedly, according to the doctrine, you could call down the power of the star. Now, if you can call it down, then you can raise energy and create. You can put it in a talisman, which holds it as a vessel that'll bring you your desire. This is the ancient doctrine that is 2,000 years old, at least. A system of magic, which we still have today. We'll talk more on astrology and Hermeticism and man's ascent to the divine in a future video, and we'll talk about Dante's Divine Comedy as well. Anyways, thank you for joining me. Once again, this is Taliesin McKnight, and have a great day, y'all.